So happy that you're coming on to talk about your creative journey and process and share your thoughts with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's going to be so much fun.
I love talking about a process which I may or may not have and hope to discover through this conversation.
Well, that brings me to, I actually did take a writing methodologies continuing studies class at SFU a few years ago, which went nowhere because it started off with what is your creative process? And I thought, well, I don't really have one that I know of. Like, are you consciously aware of a creative process when you write?
I used to be very disciplined before the pandemic, and I was writing pretty much every day, or at least writing or editing every day. I don't know if you make a distinction. But I suppose I think that my process is the only way to do anything is just to do it, which is the worst answer for everyone because they're like, I know that. I was hoping there was another way in, and it's like, if there is, I haven't found it. So I guess my process is just to do it. Sometimes I have to like outfox myself to get myself to start something because starting is always for me the hardest part. It's like the greatest
blank page.
Pardon?
The blank page.
I mean, or worse, a page where I'm partway through a narrative and I have to pick up where I left off. And then I have to match the tone, or ideally should match the tone, or I am not, for most works, I don't plan ahead. I don't like pre-plan an arc or storyboard or anything like that. For fiction or for poetry.
You just plunge in.
Pardon?
You just plunge in.
Yeah, I very rarely end up writing about the things I think I care about, because what ends up coming out, I'm like, oh, interesting. I didn't know that was in.
If you don't outline storyboard and it just comes out. So you have this creative flow, and you say that you're often surprised by what comes out on the page. So do you feel that it's another Erin that comes down, or are you almost bringing it from your muse? Are you channeling it?
I mean, a very stoned, I assume, Neil Young, who when he played Massey Hall live at 1971, called himself a radio tower, and I really like that. But I don't know that I subscribe to the idea of a muse. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm a muse agnostic, I guess. But I think that there is the thinking brain, and then there's the rest of the brain. I don't know. So if you kind of just trust your brain to know more than you think it does, and to just employ things sort of without you having to actively enforce your will upon it, you know more stuff than you think you do. You've got better instincts than you think you do. I mean, and when you don't, you edit. So I guess I don't feel like a different Erin. I'm not super aware of myself if I'm in a really good flow. But a lot of the time it's just labor. It's just kind of forcing yourself through this. The writing part, and you're like, okay, this is going somewhere. But writing for me is very much a process of discovery. I've dabbled in storyboarding, because how do you know, and like pre-planning and making an arc beforehand, because how do you know what works for you if you don't try all the things?
Absolutely, yeah.
And there's a benefit to it, and perhaps I don't know, I might be moving towards that and just not be in the practice of it, but I don't think there's a prescriptive way that does or doesn't work for me. I also suffer from not liking to be told what to do, even by myself. So when I confront my storyboards, I'm like, don't tell me what to do, Erin. And, it ends up being at best a jumping off point.
Well, that's interesting, because I can imagine that with a storyboard, you run the risk of maybe, if you're writing a novel, for example, not letting the characters develop independently of it as the writing progresses.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the fun in writing is being surprised and being like, oh, okay, great, let's veer off in that direction, sure. And then often I'll go back and be like, this is very interesting, but it's the kind of thing that the writer knows about the story that the reader doesn't have to know, and then you take it out. But it's not without its value, you know?
Mm-hmm. So basically it's letting the gates down and not filtering. Do you ever find yourself starting to write and then the rational brain says, don't go there, or that's uncomfortable? Or
uncomfortable, no, but you know, it's more self-judgment than
the critical mind.
Pardon?
The critical mind.
Yes, the critical mind. Yeah, and that's something that I don't always beat. And, you know, yeah, she shows up a lot, the critical mind. She's got a lot of things to say. But, you know, sometimes she wins and I'm like, okay, fine, not now. And then sometimes I'm like, okay, well, that's great. But like, I would rather turn out something bad than nothing. A lot of it is the self-trust that you will later be able to make it better, which is something that I think perhaps a lot of women, basically anyone who isn't a cis man, is not instilled with a good amount of self-trust by the wider world. So that's sort of a muscle I'm really hoping to build. And I think it'll help with the writing.
Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. I would love to get into gender and confidence and the arts, but I'm going to do that a little bit later because I always like to get the elephant out of the room, which you already referred to, and that is COVID-19 and how it's affected you professionally as a writer.
I mean, I think of there as, for myself, for my own practice, not for writing as a thing, as having sort of 4, maybe 5, perhaps 5 stages of writing. And that's for me, reading, very important, writing, self-evident, editing, and then performing. I perform, which is fun, and then rest, sort of like a period to reset. Someone told me, and they were talking about building muscles, but that growth happens in the rest period. That's when your muscles are actually repairing themselves and getting stronger. So I think a lot of people beat themselves up when they're not actively doing something. I'm like, oh, that's part of it. As long as you can break your own stasis, and by all means rest. It's important. It's good for you. And I have not written anything really this pandemic. I think I've written 2 first drafts of a poem that I've then never returned to. At the very beginning, I was like, okay, must put things in order, like must bring some semblance of structure to the chaos. And I was editing some things just because I was like, oh, making things a little better, taking this jumble and shaping it into something. Then that went by the wayside too. And where the pandemic has actually been surprisingly useful is I've been performing a lot more. There are lots of people who are sitting at home who want to engage with things, and I've been involved in a number of online readings, and it's been really fun. And so I guess right now that the pandemic, I'm working more on the performance aspect of my writing, and I get to practice just the different ways that I deliver a poem and for different audiences. And it's fascinating because often it's on Zoom and you're not getting the immediate feedback of the audience. People's cameras are off and you're like, do you like me? Am I like bowling with the pin setter down? What's happening here? But that's kind of a fun game as well, because you're training yourself you're like, I'm saying these things whether or not I'm being accepted, rejected, beloved, or reviled by an audience, and that's valuable. So
the toughest audience is the Zoom audience.
Oh, I don't know. There's some pretty tough audiences out there.
Well, there are, but to not get feedback, except for, if you remember, there's a clap icon that you can press on Zoom. Other than that.
Yeah, I mean, the clap icon definitely hits me the same way as real applause. I'm like, oh God, validate me. But I will say it's good, because what it's doing is, I think it's sort of growing my, because you're really just pulling from yourself when you're not getting anything back from a screen. So I'm like, okay, we got to expand that reservoir. So I think it's had that benefit, but very few writers I know. I'd say there's only one writer, and it's a writer I know of, who has written anything at all during this time.
Really?
I think a lot of mental real estate is being taken up by these sort of gigantic things that we have no control over. You know, the future is very foggy. So much of my brain is taken up by things I can't control, COVID, or, you know, the seeming decline of democracy in the States. And so I have like this much mental space for my own life. And, you know, some of that is like, okay, cooking, cleaning, the basic, showering on occasion, not that often, but sometimes. And so, you know, I feel like I've completely lost the thread of what I'm talking about, which is also a fun part of the COVID, is the COVID fog, where you're like, I don't know.
Well, we're in such extraordinary, volatile times, and to have this as a universal, global, shared experience is something we have never witnessed, and there's no seeming end. And it throws everything in question. Just economics, and how do you study, and how do you do anything? How do kids go back to school? And for the arts, it's particularly punishing, because how do you get those venues filled? You know, they're only at best going to be 50% capacity. So it really throws everything up in the air. And I can imagine that artists are just sort of scrambling to figure out the day-to-day, basically. And it's mentally exhausting. It's putting on the news is emotionally exhausting and energy sapping. And really, it's almost time to unplug, I think.
And yet you don't want to look away, because you're like, bearing witness is important, and being involved is important. I will, you know what I have been writing? I've been writing a lot of letters to city councilors.
Oh, well, there's creative writing right there.
It doesn't feel creative. But you know, I think, I guess this time has shifted us more to a model of necessity. Mm-hmm. Which is not something we've dealt with in our lifetime. I mean, we really went from a period of excess to back to this, and people aren't adjusting well, understandably. And some people are adjusting great. But I think a lot of artists are adapting, which is really interesting, with the online readings, with galleries going online, film festivals. Like, you know, on the one hand, this is very, very horrible times, but I am grateful that we are going through it with the amount of technology and alternate routes of connection.
Yes,
we have.
That's a lifesaver, isn't it? Because without that, we'd be at a total loss, because we would have lost all connection.
What would we have done even in the 90s, where a long distance call for me home to my parents would have been super expensive? Mm-hmm. Or, you know, before that, where we literally would, what if this was a letter writing moment in the, of course, things wouldn't be so globalized, and perhaps the pandemic would not have had the opportunity to be so global. But cat on the table. So you may get a little.
The editor comes. But it's interesting too, because artists are the ones who make sense of these types of experiences for the rest of us. But I'm guessing that because it is changing day to day, that there's no launching pad yet to start writing a piece or doing something creative, whether it be in the visual arts or in writing or whatever, to start explaining it? If it's too young, is that part of the issue, do you think? Or is it more worry about what's happening in my four walls?
You know, I think for myself and for some of the artists I've been speaking with, we don't feel like we are the right people to be talking about this. You know, I've been very fortunate, and everyone I know who has had COVID has recovered well, recovered quickly. So this, I don't know that this should be my conversation, and writing about it from a relatively privileged place where it's like, it impacts me, but not the way it has, I mean, impacted people who have lost family members or people who are experiencing a huge resurgence of racial violence because of, you know,
Tension.
People who are yeah,
actions, yeah.
people who are misattributing blame for a pandemic. That's who I feel like maybe has more, or people who are being disproportionately affected because of systemic racism. You know, I am really lucky, and I don't feel like I am the person to talk about this pandemic. I mean, what would I say? The people in Kitsilano aren't wearing masks, and it makes me mad. Tweet about that. No one needs to read my op-ed about it. Although I did do a really great count. I went on a kilometer walk, and I passed 183 people not wearing masks and 4.5 people who weren't me who were wearing masks. I say half because one guy had his nose out, and I was just like, why? I mean, doesn't anyone else have messed up teeth they want to cover? Like, look at this nonsense. It's a win-win. Wear your mask.
You have to brush your teeth when you leave the house or put on lipstick, right?
You do, it recirculates. I've been brushing more than ever. My dental hygiene has never been better because of masks. I'm up to like 3-4 times a day. Like, yeah, well, if I'm gonna go out, I'll be breathing my own air. But you know, I do think for me, it's the reason I'm not writing as much, and perhaps this is an excuse, I don't know. It's also okay to take a break, but is that I don't really have the mental real estate. And also I'm moving, so you know, a lot of my energy is going towards.
It's in the top 4 stress points.
Is it?
It is indeed. Moving is very stressful.
I mean, I'm sure everyone has their own reasons for why they are or aren't writing. I've been noticing a lot of lit journals have been putting out sort of special issues calls for COVID writing, or things that are talking about the pandemic. So there are outlets for that. If this is something people are working through in writing or in art, there are tons of spaces for it. For myself personally, I don't feel I have anything particularly compelling to contribute to the COVID narrative.
But it's great that you're expanding your performance because that will stand you in good stead in every aspect of your life, right? That's so cute.
Yeah,
What a loyal companion.
Pardon?
What a loyal companion.
He's pretty much the best, and truly probably what's making this pandemic so tolerable for me is having a very cute cat. I have during the pandemic taught him to sit and high five. So
that's
productive.
Another performance achievement, though not yours.
Yeah, he's very proud. Much like me, he's very food motivated, and it makes it kind of easy.
So in terms of this new volatile world, do you see other opportunities down the road for the arts?
Well, I think we have an incredible opportunity to rebuild in healthier ways that, you know, promote better self-expression, that make more room for that are more environmental. We have a real chance here once we're through the real muddy hardship of this. I don't know if we're going to take that or not. I actually, I don't know what anything's going to look like in the future, same as anyone else. I don't know why I'm even saying that. Of course I don't. But at least let it be known that I know I don't know. But certainly, I mean, going back to necessity being the mother of invention, I think we've already seen some really creative art, and a lot of people just spending their pandemic doing fun things. I'm not on TikTok. I feel like I'm a little old for TikTok. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's the feeling I have. But all these kids are like filming their dances. Maybe I shouldn't call them kids. I don't know how old they are. I hope that's not condescending. But like, people are being creative and they're streaming content. My phone told me the other day that I was on my phone 6 hours a day all week. People are hungry for entertainment.
Yeah, starving.
So, I think we'll be able to adapt, and hopefully there are people who have been so busy that now have some time to explore things they like, if they have the energy for it. No self-judgment if you don't. But yeah, I hope people are playing with things, because I feel like there's this big thing where where if I'm not immediately good at something, I'm like, no. And that sucks. It's really sucky, because you should be able to do things for fun without being good at them. And also, you only get good at things by doing them a lot.
Well, and that's the actual definition of play, right? Is doing something without any intention and just letting things flow.
Yeah.
And it's the intentionality. And I think that's the problem area that women have with creativity and play, is that most things women do is with intention. It's very deliberate. We have to schedule creativity and play in our day. And normally it's only done when all the to-do list is ticked off. So it never gets done because that to-do list is never ending. So I see that as a real issue for women, I think, and it starts at a young age, I think.
Well, women are socialized to grow up faster, which often means putting play, not always, of course, in this culture, putting play on the back burner.
Yeah.
How often do you hear things like girls mature faster, or like, oh, they're so well behaved? It's because we are reprimanded more if we aren't. I mean, how often did my grandfather say to me, slow down, you're rambunctious? And I'd be like, and I'm very fortunate that I came from parents who were like, yeah, good, express yourself. Yeah, authority is not great. Go ahead, have issues with them. And I got very lucky. And part of that is, I think, I'm Jewish, and it is a culture that really values self-expression and debate and these things. So I feel I got very nurtured, and, that's my own set of unique factors that have been lucky for me. And I know not everyone does. And it's so hard when you have been, whether or not you have personal factors telling you, yeah, express yourself. You have the entire world being like, okay, you can express yourself in these ways that are palatable, and provided you also do these things first. And, I don't know, I could go on and on about the cis hetero white Christian patriarchy. but there's again better think pieces about that.
Got to break the glass ceilings.
But yeah, I mean, I think women having fun is radical.
Yes.
And
it is.
should be encouraged.